Hi, my name is Mark, and you're watching Noah's Narrative, where everything feels real and something hurts deeper. The girl nobody saw, the morning that looked like every other morning. The alarm never rang for Nora. She was already awake. She rose before the sun touched the windows, before the birds outside the Ashton gate made a single sound. Her small room at the back of the mansion had no carpet, no curtains, and one thin blanket. She folded it neatly each morning, not because anyone checked, but because it was one of the only things in her life she could control. She tied her hair back, pulled on her grey uniform, and walked into the cold hallway. The kitchen was dark. She turned on the light, lit the stove, and started the morning like she always did. Boiling water, slicing bread, setting the long dining table with the good china, the kind she was never allowed to eat from. By the time Margaret Ashton came downstairs in her silk robe, everything was ready. She did not say good morning. She picked up the tea, looked at it, then set it back down. "It is too hot," she said flatly. Nora lowered her head. "I will make another, ma'am." She poured it out and made a fresh cup. Margaret took one sip and walked away without a word. That was the closest thing to the conversation Nora had most mornings. The house that gleamed on the outside. The Ashton family lived in one of the grandest houses in the city. 4 floors, 12 rooms, a swimming pool in the back garden, and a staff of 6. But of all the staff, Nora worked the hardest and earned the least respect. Ruth, the outhouse keeper who had been with the family for over 20 years, sometimes watched Nora from across the room with an expression nobody else could read. Not with pity, not with guilt, something deeper, something heavier. Once when Priya Ashton threw a glass of orange juice at the wall because it was not cold enough and the juice ran down onto Nora's clean floor, Ruth moved to help clean it. Nora gently stopped her. "I have it, Aunt Ruth." Ruth's hand trembled slightly as she stepped back. Gerald Ashton was rarely home. When he was, he moved through the house like a man walking through an office. He spoke in short sentences and looked at his phone more than he looked at his family. He had never once looked at Nora directly. Victor, his eldest son, was different in the way a storm is different from rain. He was not loud like Priya. He was quick, controlled, and sharp. He noticed things other people missed. But even Victor saw Nora as furniture, something that belonged in the background of his life. The way she carried along at night after everyone was fed and the kitchen was spotless and the living room pillows were fluffed back into perfect position. Nora sat in her room with a small notebook. She did not write complaints. She did not write wishes. She wrote letters. Letters to the father she had never met, letters she never sent. She described the day, the small moments, the color of the evening sky. Through the kitchen window, she wrote with the kind of careful detail that showed he had a sharp, thoughtful mind hiding behind her silence. One letter began, Today someone looked through me again. Not past me, through me, as if I were made of glass. I wondered something if that is easier for them to not see me at all." She closed the notebook and placed it beneath her mattress. She did not know that the man she had been writing to all these years had spent the last 6 months searching for her. She did not know that his name was Thomas Whitfield. She did not know that his net worth had been just published in a national magazine as the 3rd largest fortune in the entire country. And she did not know that the man he had sent to find her, a calm, serious figure named Sebastian Whitfield, had just passed through the city gates, that every evening Nora turned off her light. Tomorrow would be another early morning, another cold hallway, another cup of tea made twice. She had no idea that tomorrow would also be the day everything around her quickly began to fall apart. The cracks began to show. A stranger at the gate. The black car arrived on Tuesday. Nora noticed it first because she was the one who always answered the gate buzzer when the other staff were busy. She dried her hands on her apron, walked to the small intercom by the kitchen door and pressed the button. Ashton residence, she said quickly. The voice on the other side was calm and mild, the kind of voice that belonged to someone who never raised it because he never nodded to. My name is Sebastian Whitfield. I have an appointment with Mr. Gerald Ashton. Nora buzzed him in without another word and went back to peeling vegetables. She did not see the way Sebastian paused when he stopped through the front door. She did not see how his eyes moved carefully across the entrance hall, then landed on her retreating figure through the kitchen doorway. She did not see him go very still for just a moment because before Gerald appeared at the top of the staircase, she was already back at the stove. But Ruth saw it. Ruth saw everything, and when Sebastian glanced toward the kitchen one more time before following Gerald upstairs, Ruth sat down on cloth and pressed one hand flat against the counter to steady herself. The man who asked the wrong question. The meeting between Gerald and Sebastian lasted nearly an hour. Nora served them coffee halfway through, stepping into the study quickly, placing the tray on the side table and leaving without making eye contact. Sebastian watched her the entire time she was in the room. Gerald did not notice because Gerald was talking about himself, which was what Gerald did best. When Nora left, Sebastian turned his cup slowly in his hands. That young woman, he said carefully, how long has she worked here? Gerald barely looked up from his papers. Nora? 3 years, maybe 4. Which girl does her job? Why? Sebastian smiled in a way that gave nothing away. No reason, the coffee is excellent. Gerald accepted the compliment as if he had made it himself and moved on. Downstairs, Nora was washing the vegetables and humming a song she did not remember learning. It was something that had always lived in her memory, soft and unhurried, like a lullaby from a place she could not name. Ruth walked in and stopped in the doorway. Nora, she said. Something in the Ruth's voice made Nora turn around. Not the word itself, but the weight behind it. Ruth's face looked older suddenly, as if she had aged 5 years between the hallway and the kitchen door. Are you alright, Aunt Ruth? Ruth opened her mouth, closed it, then nodded once. Just tired, she said. Just very tired. She turned and walked away. Nora watched her go, then turned back to the sink. The water ran cold over her hands and she did not notice. Priya makes everything worse. That evening, Priya came home from shopping trip with 4 large bags and a mood that filled every room she entered. She dropped the bags in the entrance hall and shouted for Nora without even taking off her shoes. Nora, Nora, come here right now. Nora appeared from the corridor. Take these to my room and do not touch anything inside the bags with your bare hands. Use the cloth. Last time you left fingerprints on my new bag and it took me a week to stop thinking about it. Nora picked up the bags carefully. They were heavy, but she carried all 4 without complaint. Victor appeared at the top of the staircase as Nora was climbing. He looked down at her, then at his sister. You have arms, he said to Priya. Priya rolled her eyes. She is literally paid to do this, Victor. Victor said nothing more, but as Nora passed him on the stairs, he stepped to the side to give her more room. It was a small thing, it cost him nothing, but Nora noticed it because small kindness when you received almost none become enormous. She set the bags down in Priya's room, arranged them neatly against the wardrobe and left without being thanked. The notebook moves. That night, something felt different. Nora sat on her bed and reached beneath the mattress for her notebook. Her fingers searched the familiar spot and for one sharp moment found nothing. Her breath caught. Then her hand moved further left and touched the cover. She pulled it out. It was in slightly different position than she had left it. She sat very still. She told herself she must have moved it herself without thinking. She told herself the cleaning girl who sometimes came into her room and bumped the mattress. She told herself many things. But she checked the notebook carefully, page by page, and when she reached the last written entry, the one that spoke about being looked through like glass, she felt a strange and uncomfortable feeling rise in her chest. Someone had read it. She could not prove it, but she felt in the way you feel rain before it falls. She closed the notebook and this time hid it somewhere new. Outside her small window, the black car was still parked at the end of the road. Sebastian Whitfield had not driven back to wherever he came from. He had checked into the small hotel 2 streets away, and in his jacket pocket was a photograph. A photograph of a young woman, maybe 19 or 20 years old, with quiet eyes and a way of holding herself that was both humble and somehow unbreakable. He had been carrying it for 6 months. He looked at it once more before turning off the light. The resemblance was not something you could miss, not if you had ever met Thomas Whitfield. It lived in the angle of the jaw, the stillness of the expression, the particular way the eyes looked at the world, as if they already understood more than they were letting on. He had found her. Now came the part that Body had planned for, the part where the truth had to be spoken out loud inside a house full of people who had spent years believing that Nora was nothing. He turned off the lamp. Tomorrow everything would begin to change. The truth that changed everything, the morning that felt different. Nora woke up with a feeling she could not explain. It was not fear exactly, it was not excitement, it was something sitting between the two, like the air before a storm when everything goes very quick and even the leaves stop moving. She lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling of her small room, then rose, folded her blanket, and went to face the day. The kitchen was cold as always. She lit the stove, boiled the water, and began setting the table. But her hands moved slower than usual. Her mind kept drifting to the notebook, to Ruth's face in the doorway, to the black car, to the Sebastian Whitfield calm eyes moving across the entrance hall and landing somewhere they were not supposed to land. She shook her head and focused on the bread. By the time Margaret came downstairs, everything was ready and Nora was standing quietly by the counter the way she always stood, hands folded, eyes low. But Margaret stopped when she reached the bottom of the stairs. There was a man sitting in the formal living room. Gerard stood beside him and Gerard's face was doing something it almost never did. It was uncertain. Gerard Ashton had not looked uncertain a single day in the 4 years Nora had worked in this house. Margaret looked at her husband. Gerald, who is this? Gerald cleared his throat. Sebastian Whitfield, he works for Thomas Whitfield. A silence followed that was different from ordinary silence. It has texture and weight. Margaret turned slowly and looked at Nora, the name that cracked the room. Sebastian stood when Margaret entered. He was polite, composed, and unhurried in the way that people are when they hold all the information and are simply waiting for the right moment to place it on the table. Mistress Ashton, he said warmly, thank you for allowing me a moment of your time. It was not aware I had a choice, Margaret said, sitting down and crossing her ankles the way she did when she was performing composure. Gerard sat across from Sebastian. Priya had appeared at the top of the staircase, drawn by the unusual stillness of the house. Victor stood in the hallway doorway watching. Nora remained in the kitchen. Nobody had told her to come in. Nobody had told her to leave. She stood by the stove with the kettle in her hand and listened without meaning. I represent Thomas Whitfield. Sebastian began. Most of you will know that name from the financial news. His companies operate across 9 countries. His foundation was build schools and hospitals across the region. He is a private man, which is why most people know him name, but very little else about him. Gerard nodded slowly. He knew the name. Everyone in business knew the name. 8 months ago, Sebastian continued, Mr. Whitfield began a private search, a search for his daughter. She was separated from him under painful circumstances when she was very young. Through a series of events I'm not at liberty to fully discuss today. He has been looking for her for many years, but it was only recently that the search produced a genuine lead. The kettle in Nora's hand had gone cold. She had forgotten to pour it. The lad, Sebastian said, his voice remaining perfectly level, brought us here to this house. Another silence, longer this time. Margaret's eyes moved toward the kitchen doorway. What Ruth finally said. It was Ruth who broke everything open. She came from the back corridor, walking slowly, and she stood in the center of the living room with her hands clasped in the front of her and her eyes red at the edges in the way of someone who has been holding something back for a very long time. I have to speak, she said. I cannot stay quiet anymore. Everyone looked at her. I have known for 3 years. Ruth said, I recognized her the first week she came here. I knew her mother. Her mother and I grew up in the same village. When Nora arrived at this store asking for work, thin and quiet and so careful not to take up any space, I saw her mother's face looking back at me and I said nothing. Her voice cracked once, then steadied. I told myself it was not my place. I told myself she was safe here, that she had a roof and a food and time to grow. I told myself many things, but I was a coward. And I'm sorry. She looked directly at Nora, who had stepped into the doorway of the kitchen without realizing she had moved. Your full name, Ruth said softly, is Nora Eleanor Whitfield. The room did not explode. It did not fill with noise. It went absolutely, completely, devastatingly silent. Priya made a small sound that was not quite a word. Margaret's hand gripped the arm of her chair. Gerard stared at the carpet. Victor looked at Nora with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Not pity, something more honest than that. Nora stood in the doorway holding the cold kettle. Her face was still, her eyes were clear. She had always known there was something missing from her story. She had always felt in the same way you feel a word sitting at the edge of your tongue that you cannot quite reach. A gap in herself that no amount of silence of hard work or folded blankets had ever been able to fill. She looked at Sebastian. He is looking for me. She said it was not a question. He has been looking for you for a very long time, Sebastian said gently. The woman they had never seen. What happened next was not a scene from a film. There was no gasping, no dramatic falling to knees, no instant transformation. Nora set the kettle down on the side table. She united her apron slowly and folded it over her arm. Then she sat down in the chair nearest to her, the small chair near the window that nobody ever used, and she took one long quick break. I want to speak to him, she said. Sebastian nodded and handed her his phone. The call had already been connected. It had been connected for several minutes, sitting open and waiting because Thomas Whitfield had been listening, because he had not been able to wait in an office while someone else delivered the most important news of his life. Nora held the phone to her ear. Hello, said a voice, deep, careful and carrying inside it something that sounded like 20 years of grief being released in a single word. Nora closed her eyes. Hello, she said back. Around her, the Ashton family sat in their grand living room surrounded by their expensive furniture and their carefully maintained image, and not one of them made a sound. Margaret's tea sat untouched and cooling. Priya had both hands pressed over her mouth. Gerard was looking at the floor with the expression of a man counting the cost of every cruel indifference he had ever shown. Victor was looking at Nora. He was looking at her the way nobody in that house had ever looked at her before, as if she were real, as if she had always been real and he was only now In this moment, understanding what he had failed to see you for 4 years. Nora spoke quickly into the phone for a long time. The rest of the world waited. The girl who was never invisible. 3 weeks later, a car came to collect Nora's things. There was not many, a bag of clothes, a few personal items, and a notebook hidden in a place only she knew. She carried them herself to the front door. Ruth embarrassed her for a long time and wept openly. Nora held her gently. You told the truth when it mattered. She said, that is enough. Priya stood at the top of the staircase and said nothing. Her face held an expression that was unfamiliar on her, something quieter and less certain than her usual boldness. Gerard shook Nora's hands formally, like a businessman completing a transaction he had lost. He could not meet her eyes. Margaret said, we treated you poorly. I know that it was not a full apology, but from Margaret Ashton, it was as close as the truth had ever come to her lips. Victor walked her to the car. They stood outside for a moment in the morning light. He looked at her the way he had looked at her in the living room, openly and without pretense. I'm sorry, he said. Not because of who your father is, because of who you are. I should have seen it a long time ago. Nora looked at him for a moment, then she smiled. It was a small smile, but it was real, and it was the first one she had given freely inside those gates in 4 years. You see it now, she said completely. That is something. She got into the car as it pulled away from the grand house with its gleaming gates and perfect gardens. Nora did not look back. She looked forward at the open road, at the morning sky, stretching wide and unguarded ahead of her. She reached into her bag and touched the cover of her notebook. Tonight she would write a new letter, not to the father she had never met, to the father she was going to meet today. And for the first time in as long as she could remember, she did not know what the next page would hold. She found that she was not afraid of that at all. Thank you.